Welcome to the Outthinker podcast. Each week, we talk with forward-looking strategists and innovators that are challenging the status quo, leading the future of business, and shaping our world. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf, founder of the Outthinker Strategy Network. Jonathan Nee is a professor of practice in media and technology and co-director of the media and technology program of one of my alma maters, Columbia Business School, where he has taught media, mergers and acquisitions and strategic management of media. He serves as a senior advisor at Evercore, an investment banking advisory firm. Before joining there as senior managing director in 2003, he was a managing director and co-head of Morgan Stanley's media group, and was previously publishing sector head at the Communications, Media, and Entertainment Group at Goldman Sachs. Jonathan also serves on the boards of New Alternatives for Children, the National Women's Law Center, the Citizens Committee for Children of New York, and is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. His writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, and the Titanic. He is the co-author of several books: Class Clowns, How the Smartest Investors Lost Billions in Education, The Accidental Investment Banker, Inside the Decade That Transformed Wall Street, co-author of The Curse of the Mogul, What Went Wrong with the World's Leading Media Companies. I absolutely loved his most recent book, The Platform Delusion, Who Wins and Who Loses in the Age of Tech Titans. It's packed with real-world insights gathered from the streets from decades of feasting or fasting based on the accuracy of his predictions of which companies will thrive and which will fall. In this episode, he shares why you should not be looking to become a platform, as it seems almost every entrepreneur and incumbent wants to do, and shares instead what you should be looking for. How to build your competitive moat by creating multiple reinforcing sources of advantage. Why Netflix is not a platform, though many think it is. Why Amazon only became a platform after decades of success not being a platform. He answers the question, what's better, building network effects or scale advantages? His answer will surprise you. Why Airbnb is a better business than Uber. And he starts exploring what it takes to compete in an ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan Nee. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to talk to us. I have thoroughly loved your book, and it is really an honor to have you with us.
Thank you so much for bringing me here.
I've got so many questions, and our time with you is limited, so we'll kind of prioritize. But we do want to get to know you a little bit personally. Same question I ask all of my guests at the very beginning. On a personal level, if someone really knows you, what do they know about you?
They know that I am a little bit out there. I like to test boundaries, and that is partly reflecting the fact that I love to always be learning. And if you're not testing boundaries, chances are you're not learning. You can't test boundaries without sometimes going over the edge. I'd say people will say that about me as well.
I love it. Yeah, we believe definitely in lifelong learning here and pushing the boundaries. So as we heard in the intro, you came up through banking and finance, particularly around media and education. You've written a lot in those areas. This is a podcast about strategy. And this is the second question I ask all of our experts. And they're all experts in strategy, and they never give me the same answer, which is, what is your definition of strategy?
My definition of strategy, it's an important question to ask because it's one of those words, kind of like platform, that gets bandied about and means different things to different people. To me, strategy is about big decisions that can have an impact sustainably on your ability to generate superior returns. So to me, though, that has huge implications because it means that if you're a business that is in a structurally highly competitive sector, there are no meaningful barriers to entry. I mean, there can be great businesses in such sectors, but they're great because you have great operators who are relentless and taking care of business day in and day out. But they shouldn't have a strategy department because there is nothing you can do from a decision-making point of view that will create a structural ability for you to continuously, for a sustainable period of time, generate superior value, because there's nothing other than operating better and smarter than the next guy, which is not strategy. That's just efficient operations. I don't mean to diminish The difference between the best in class and the worst in class can be dramatic. And the importance of operating efficiency and having a culture of that is usually important in businesses with strong barriers to entry, because once they start going away, you want to have time to revamp your strategy. And if you don't have a culture of operating efficiency, the time you have to do that is not very long.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'd love it if you would walk through your framework that you use in platform delusion. When you talk about customer captivity, preferential access to resources, and economies of scale as like the three primary drivers of competitive advantage. Can you just explain that to us?
Let's put it in the context of what the platform delusion is and why I'm talking about that stuff. Because there are two pieces of conventional wisdom that are actually sort of mutually inconsistent, but strangely, some people hold them both. One is this idea that the world is dominated by a handful of platforms and is structurally destined to inevitably just be swallowed up by these ever encroaching platforms that just are breaking down all of the vertical barriers, and amongst them, they are going to take over the world. The other piece of conventional wisdom is simply that if you are a platform, you are great. That platforms are this mystical business model that if you find one, you can take a long lunch with a couple of martinis and not have to worry about it because it can't be killed. It is a flywheel. It is a fabulous business. And the latter piece of conventional wisdom is one that's used to encourage entrepreneurs and investors to enter new businesses and say, this is a can't lose opportunity. Whereas the former is a story about how these handful of huge incumbent platforms are going to kill everybody. Obviously, there's something a little bit weird about both of those stories continuing to exist, because if there are a handful of existing people who are going to kill everybody, it's not clear that it's worthwhile trying to be an entrepreneur and start new things because you're destined to get crushed. But weirdly, there are people who seem to promote both ideas at the same time. There's actually a book. You may have had these people on your show. You should. The book is selling well. But to me, it's kind of incoherent. I think it's called Competition in the Age of AI by two professors at Harvard Business School. And they simultaneously hold this view that the big platforms are taking over the world and that it's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur. Very hard to understand. And really, the point of this book is, don't get hung up on the word platform. Focus on the big picture point, which is what makes a business a good business in general. The fact that it is a platform is maybe the beginning of the analysis. It certainly isn't the end of the analysis. And there are plenty of good ones and there are plenty of bad ones. Focus instead on the characteristics that matter, that allow you to generate superior returns over time. And to the question you asked earlier, what is the thing that allows a person to generate superior returns over time? Well, it's the ability to do stuff that other people can't. It's called a barrier to entry, or it's called competitive advantage. That is the thing that makes it different. What makes a business a great business tends to be multiple reinforcing sources of competitive advantage. If you have just one, chances are it's not going to be terribly resilient. People will figure it out. Generally, the core advantage on which other advantages will get built to reinforce and protect, the core advantage is scale. And scale is actually a complicated concept because people hear scale and they think big. But scale is a relative, not an absolute idea. It is only an advantage if there are 20 guys and they're all really big and they all do the same thing. It's not a good business because there's 20 guys who do the same thing. It only makes a difference if you're in a business and you're twice as big as the next person. That can give you an advantage. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what is the source of the benefit of being bigger? Other than, being able to tell your mom at Thanksgiving dinner that you're bigger than the next guy. What is the actual tangible benefit? And the answer is there are two main ones. One is the historic one that people used to focus on before the digital age of platforms and the like. And that was simply fixed costs. Because when a business has a cost structure that is predominantly a fixed cost structure, if you're twice as big as the next guy, your average cost is going to be dramatically lower than the next guy. First of all, what do we mean by platform? Platform means something very, very specific. It is a particular kind of business model in which the core value proposition that is created comes from the connections that it either creates and or enhances. So it's not making something. It's connecting folks. It can be connecting software developers and users through an operating system. That's a platform. It could be connecting buyers and sellers in a marketplace business. It can be just connecting people in a social network. But the core value proposition is the connection. Now, in the commerce context, it's very important to make this distinction because what Amazon was in the beginning of its life was not a platform. It was a store. It bought stuff and sold it. It wasn't in the connection business. It was in the connection of having a big warehouse, buying some stuff, and selling it online. It was almost a decade after they were born that they opened up the so-called marketplace business, where it is in the business of being the facilitator between other sellers and other buyers. And they do that, actually, both of those things together. In the media business, YouTube is a platform. It is not predominantly in the I make stuff content business. I'm connecting content creators with viewers. On the other hand, people are constantly calling Netflix a platform. It is not. It's like a retailer, right? It buys content, it makes content, and it sells it. So in a business whose predominant value creation methodology is by creating networks, and the bigger that network, the better it is. The best example of that is, the phone system. It also has a big fixed cost infrastructure. You build a big physical phone network. If you have one person on it, it is not valuable because who are you going to call? Second person, it makes it wildly more valuable. The third more, the fourth more. Same thing with the social network. The whole point of it, the whole value proposition is being able to connect with people. And the more people that are on, the more valuable it is. So that is a different way, what I sometimes call it's the demand side version of the benefit of scale rather than the supply side version. So the supply side version, the cost side version is from fixed costs being spread. The demand side version is if you are relatively bigger social network than the next network, you're more attractive. So if you're a new person who's thinking of joining a network, are you going to join the network that has fewer people, which can offer you fewer connections, or are you going to join the network that has more people? And that's where this idea of the virtuous circle, the flywheel effect, that is what's called network effects. So network effects is not really the advantage. The advantage is scale. Network effects is how it manifests on the demand side, whereas fixed cost is how it manifests on the supply side. That may sound like a semantic distinction, but it's an important one because people are always saying, I've got a great business. It's a network effects business. But that's like saying, I've got a great business. It has a lot of fixed costs. It's great for the business if you're the biggest, but if you're not the biggest, you're actually at a competitive disadvantage. The advantage is relative scale. So if you're in a network effects business and you're the smallest guy, that's bad news. So scale is the core advantage. And then the question is, how do you protect that advantage? Because if all you have is scale and a bunch of fixed costs, you could call Henry Kravis up and say, hey, Henry, you see this business? It's got 50% margins. Let's build an exact same infrastructure. We'll offer 20% discount. We'll get half of them. It'll be a duopoly instead of a monopoly. How do you stop that from happening? If you're the incumbent and you want to protect against an insurgent, what do you do? What do you need? You need to have other reinforcing advantages. And historically, the best reinforcing advantage is some kind of customer captivity, some kind of stickiness with your user base, which will stop them from just running to Henry Kravis's new competitor because there's a 10% discount. If there's some switching cost, if there's some long-term contracts, if there's a nature of habit that just makes the inertia unlikely that you'll do it, if that's the case, all you need to do is announce, hey, we'll match any price. If you say that, you're assured no one will ever leave. And if no one will ever leave, nobody's going to make the investment in the first place in order to try to compete with you. So you need to have some kind of reinforcing advantage to impact that. One of the problems with digital platforms and network effects businesses is that often in digital environments, it's very hard to be sticky. Think about the last time you were going to buy something online. You checked 10 different things. You're not loyal to anyone. Maybe you'll go to Amazon to see what kind of a baseline price, but then you'll check 3 or 4 other things. It's very hard to make people sticky. And there are many network effects businesses where you had the market share lead, but somebody else announces, I have a new network and we're giving away some stuff.
Right. Social media is probably the first place that my mind goes to kind of every 3 years or something. There's Instagram to TikTok to whatever.
That's right. So Facebook was not the first. It wasn't the second. It wasn't the third. But what it did, so there were a couple of things that went on, and we can talk about those. But think about their strategy. Their strategy, everything they do is about sucking you in, about making you sticky, having you put all of your information there. So if you were going to leave, you'd have to take it all out and move it over somewhere else, providing you services that you integrate into your daily life. You probably don't realize how many other services you sign into through Facebook. So if you were going to get off Facebook, you'd have to re-sign up all of those services. All of those things create stickiness. But in general, in digital environments, it is harder to be sticky. So that's the bad news about digital environments. And so again, these ideas that all platforms are great. Well, it turns out that they're not. That is, platforms where it is very easy to switch from one to another. And by the way, the other sort of strange way that strategists sometimes talk is they set up fixed cost scale advantages as somehow in competition with network effects advantages. And people say things like, you know what, it's network effects are better. These newfangled exciting digital scale advantages, i.e. network effects, are better than those boring old analog fixed cost advantages, as if they are somehow in some macho contest against each other. But if you think about it, the key about fixed costs is what fixed costs tell you economically in a business is it based on the size of that market and the market structure. The amount of the fixed costs will tell you what level of activity you need in order to break even, which will also tell you for a given market size, what market share is a break-even market share. And the higher the fixed costs, the higher the break-even market share. So we talked before about the fact that if it's a business without any fixed costs, there's actually no scale effects on the supply side, right? There's no scale advantage. But similarly, if you're a network effects business and you don't need to have significant fixed costs in a network effects business, but if you don't, chances are that the break-even market shares are very, very low. And if you're in a world where you've got 20 similarly sized networks and they all break even and there's no customer captivity and each of you are just competing each other, sort of getting some short-term benefit by paying for their networks, it's going to be miserable. So actually, you want both, right? You want to have a network effects business that has high fixed costs so that break-even market shares are high. And honestly,
there's not enough left for insurgents.
Exactly. Obviously, you would still love to have a little customer captivity. I mean, frankly, take a business like ride sharing. People always say, oh, it's big data. Big data. Big data is great.
Yeah.
Think about the value of data in Airbnb. Well, I know where you're staying. You're at a place where you're going to be spending a lot of money. That's why you're going there. You're going on vacation. You know all of the folks in the nearby area. You know what previous people who stayed there did and enjoyed. You continuously are improving. You can market that data. You can use that data.
Sure. To restaurants, to shops.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You also know people who stayed there, what are other places they've stayed and enjoyed. So you can market to you the next time about where they should go, what they can do. Think about Uber. Uber knows where I live and where I go to work, because that's basically how I use it. And my 3 favorite restaurants. Okay. I mean, what does that do for you? It really depends. In the same way that liquidity in some use cases is valuable and keeps getting more valuable. I mean, search is a great example of that. Every time you search, Google gets smarter about what ad to serve you and about which search result to get you. And that keeps getting better and better and better. In the case of Uber, we talked about the value of the data. Once you have a certain amount, anybody who sees that you go to work twice, they have all the information they need. You can keep going every day, but they don't get a lot smarter about it. So you want to find use cases where the value of incremental data doesn't tap out. And then that, again, would be another source of competitive advantage. People say, oh, big data is an advantage. Sometimes it is, but actually it's usually an edge case where it really is.
This is so fascinating, but we are reaching the top of our time with you. There's one question I want to ask. I don't know if you're going to have an opinion on this. And then another question I was going to ask you to do a little prediction for us. Something that our chief strategy officers have been looking at is if the difference between a platform and an ecosystem is platform, someone owns it and sets the rules. An ecosystem might be, like the Wintel ecosystem or the automotive ecosystem in Germany versus Japan. How do you think about making the choice of which you plug into or which ecosystem is going to thrive?
So ecosystem is really about the overall business environment. Who are the constituents? How do they interact with each other? Platform is a specific business model that connects some part of an ecosystem. But to me, what's most interesting about the connection between the structure of the ecosystem and the question that we were just talking about, which is the platform a good business or not?
Fascinating. Oh my gosh. I have so much more to ask. And all I can say is that I highly recommend people read The Platform Delusion. How else can people connect with you, learn from you, and keep up with your thinking? I know you're not really in the business of thought leadership as much as teaching and investing, but
yeah, go to Columbia Business School. I am on Twitter. You can become the 201st one follower of me on Twitter. I actually, just to keep myself out there and thinking about whatever's going on in the world, I try to write a book review every month, either for the New York Times or for Business Insider. And I've been doing that for about a decade. So any of those things would be great.
Okay. And Columbia Business School exec ed as well?
Rarely do I do exec ed.
We have to take an MBA there. Okay. So we got to make the big commitment, the big fixed cost investment to get to learn from you.
There you go. There you go. Or just read the book reviews.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for being here. It was great talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our producers, Karina Reyes and Zach Ness, our editor, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kaihan Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next week with another episode of Outthinkers.